Ma'am, please don't move. The card reader beeped, froze, then went silent. The clerk stared at the screen, then at me, like I'd just pulled a fire alarm in a quiet building. An hour earlier, my husband had kicked me out in the rain. No money. No apology. Just a suitcase, and the words, "You're embarrassing me." Now, standing at a hotel counter with my father's old card in my hand, I felt that same shame crawl up my spine, until phones started ringing behind the desk. Security whispered. A manager rushed out, and somewhere in the building, a system shut down. Have you ever been humiliated by the person who promised to protect you? Ever been discarded like you were nothing, only to discover you were standing on something powerful the whole time? I didn't even know the card was real. I didn't know my father had kept secrets. And I definitely didn't know that using it would expose a betrayal far worse than my husband throwing me out. Because that single swipe didn't just pay for a room. It uncovered a truth my marriage had buried. And triggered a chain of events that left a bank scrambling and my husband under investigation. Welcome, my beautiful family, to Silent Echoes of the Heart, where stories don't just entertain, but heal, teach, and awaken something deep inside us. Before we begin, tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. And if you believe stories can change lives, please like and subscribe, so you never miss a lesson wrapped in a powerful story. Now, get comfortable. Because this is the story of how being thrown away led me to discover who I really was. The rain had been falling for 3 days straight, the kind that didn't pound or roar but seeped quietly into everything, soaking shoes, moods, and hope alike. By the time Marcus told me to pack my things, the sky outside our kitchen window was the color of wet concrete, and the glass was streaked with long, uneven lines of water, as if the house itself were crying. He didn't ask. He told, "Sarah, this isn't working anymore." His voice was calm. Too calm. The way someone sounds when they've already rehearsed the conversation in their head 100 times, and decided how it would end before the other person ever opened their mouth. I was standing by the counter, one hand resting on the edge near the sink, the other clutching a dish towel I hadn't realized I was gripping so tightly. The kitchen smelled faintly of coffee and lemon cleaner. My kitchen. The one where I'd spent years cooking dinners that went cold because Marcus worked late, baking birthday cakes that he barely touched, and making Sunday breakfasts that slowly turned into solo meals as his schedule filled with important meetings. "What do you mean, it isn't working?" I asked, though part of me already knew. Marcus sighed and loosened his tie, glancing at his reflection in the microwave door instead of looking at me. "I mean exactly what I said." He turned then, leaning against the counter with his arms crossed, his expression carefully arranged into something that suggested disappointment rather than cruelty. That was his specialty, making every wound sound reasonable. "My colleagues ask what my wife does," he continued. "And every time, I have to stumble through some vague explanation about you finding yourself." He lifted his fingers and made air quotes. "Do you have any idea how that sounds?" The words hit harder than I expected. Not because they were new, we'd circled this argument before, but because of how easily they came to him now. "I gave up my job for you," I said quietly. "We agreed on that. When we moved here, that was supposed to be temporary," he snapped. 7 years, Sarah. 7 years of charity events, brunches, and you playing supportive spouse while everyone else's wives run businesses or sit on boards. Playing supportive spouse. Like it had been a hobby. Like it hadn't been a slow erasure. "I kept things running," I said. "I managed the house. I hosted your clients. I volunteered because you said it mattered." "It doesn't matter," Marcus cut in. His patience was thinning now. "None of that translates to anything. It's embarrassing." There it was. The word landed heavy in my chest. Embarrassing. He straightened, adjusting his cufflinks. The silver ones I'd bought him last Christmas after saving for weeks because he'd admired them in a shop window. "I'm done carrying dead weight." Dead weight. I stared at him, certain I'd misheard. 7 years of marriage reduced to 2 words that felt like a verdict. "Dead? Weight?" I repeated. Marcus shrugged. "I'm being honest. You should appreciate that. Honest. As if honesty excused cruelty. Outside, a car drove past. tires hissing against wet pavement. Life moving on, indifferent to the moment my marriage cracked wide open. "I supported you through law school," I said, my voice trembling despite my effort to keep it steady. "I moved cities for your promotion. I put my career on hold because you asked me to." "And I'm grateful," he replied, his tone suggesting the conversation was already over. "But gratitude doesn't mean I have to stay stuck." Stuck. The word echoed inside me as I watched him pick up his briefcase. "You have until Friday," he said, checking his watch. "My lawyer will reach out with the divorce paperwork." Friday. 3 days. "Marcus, please," I said before I could stop myself, hating the way the word came out softer than I intended. "We can talk about this, counseling, anything." That was when he looked at me fully, really looked at me, and whatever I saw in his eyes made my stomach drop. There was no hesitation there. No conflict. Just relief. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," he said. "Vanessa will be moving in this weekend." The name sliced through the room. Vanessa. His administrative assistant. 26. Impeccably dressed. Always polite in that rehearsed professional way. The woman who stayed late with him, who texted after hours about urgent files, who laughed just a little too hard at his jokes during company dinners. I felt heat rush to my face. "You're replacing me already?" He scoffed. "This isn't about replacement, it's about compatibility." Compatibility, like we were mismatched software. "She understands my world," he continued. "She's driven, ambitious. She doesn't expect me to apologize for wanting more." I wanted to scream, to throw the dish towel across the room, to remind him of the nights I'd waited up for him, the sacrifices I'd made, the way I'd slowly shrunk myself to fit into his life. Instead, I stood there, frozen, as the rain continued its quiet assault on the windows. The signs had been there. I saw that now. The sudden interest in expensive cologne, the new gym membership, the way he'd stopped asking my opinion and started informing me of decisions, the way his compliments had turned into critiques, then into silence. I'd ignored it all because facing it meant admitting I'd built my life around someone who saw me as an accessory. "I'll pack," I said finally. He nodded, satisfied. "That's for the best." I walked past him toward the bedroom we'd shared for 7 years. The bed was neatly made, the decorative pillows arranged just so. The room smelled faintly of his cologne and my lavender lotion, a mixture that now made my chest ache. I packed methodically. Clothes first. Practical things. Jeans, sweaters, a coat. Then my books, the ones he'd always complained took up too much space. I folded my grandmother's quilt carefully, running my fingers over the worn stitching she'd sewn by hand decades ago. Photographs came last. Not the wedding album. Not the framed pictures from our vacations. I took the ones from before Marcus, college friends, my parents smiling on a beach, me standing in front of my first office building, proud and hopeful. Everything else stayed. The dining table we'd picked together, the couch we argued over, the wedding china that had been used twice in 7 years. They belonged to a life that no longer felt like mine. By the time I dragged my suitcase into the hallway, Marcus was already there, slipping on his coat. "I'll change the locks on Monday," he said casually. "You can coordinate with my lawyer if you need anything else." If you need anything else. As if I were returning a defective product. I stepped outside into the rain without another word. The cold soaked through my shoes almost immediately. But I welcomed it. The sting grounded me. As I walked down the driveway, I didn't look back. Because if I had, I might have seen something that would have broken me even more. Regret, or worse, indifference. And I wasn't sure which one I could survive. The rain followed me to the curb, needling my face as I stood there with my suitcase and nowhere to go. For a moment, I simply stared at the dark screen of my phone, willing it to offer answers it didn't have. I could call a cab, but to where? Every address that came to mind was tied to a quiet embarrassment I wasn't ready to explain. I started walking. Each step away from the house felt unreal, like I was leaving a stage after a performance that had gone terribly wrong. Cars passed, headlights blurring through the drizzle, drivers sealed safely inside lives that were still intact. My shoes soaked through within minutes, the thin soles offering no protection from the cold seeping up from the pavement. I ended up at a small cafe a few blocks away, the kind that stayed open late for students and insomniacs. I ducked inside, shaking water from my coat, and ordered the cheapest thing on the menu, a small coffee I didn't even want. The barista smiled politely, slid the cup across the counter, and went back to wiping down surfaces, unaware that my entire world had just collapsed. I sat by the window and opened my banking app. The number stared back at me, small and unforgiving. $847.13. That was it. 7 years of marriage, and that was what I had access to. I refreshed the screen, convinced it had to be wrong. The joint account, our account, was gone, transferred, emptied. My hands trembled as I scrolled, reading transaction after transaction I didn't recognize. Large sums moved quietly, efficiently, all within the last few weeks. Marcus hadn't just planned my exit. He'd prepared for it. I closed the app and wrapped my hands around the warm cup, trying to calm the panic rising in my chest. I told myself there had to be a mistake. There had to be an explanation. But deep down, I knew better. I called a lawyer the next morning. Her name was Patricia, and her voice was calm in a way that suggested she'd heard versions of my story far too many times. "Yes," she said after listening. "Unfortunately, this happens more often than people think, especially when one spouse controls the finances. We can address it during the divorce proceedings, but it won't be immediate." "How long?" I asked. "Months," she replied gently. "Possibly longer." Months. I thanked her, hung up, and sat on the edge of a park bench, watching wet leaves cling stubbornly to the ground. I did some quick mental math and felt my stomach drop. Even if I spent nothing but the bare minimum, I had weeks, not months. That's how I ended up at the Riverside Inn. It wasn't the kind of place you dreamed of staying. But it was clean, quiet, and charged by the week. The sign out front flickered on and off, and the lobby smelled faintly of old carpet and disinfectant. It felt like a place meant for people passing through, not people who'd just been erased from their own lives. The man at the front desk looked up as I approached. He had a weathered face and kind eyes, the sort that suggested he noticed more than he said. "Checking in?" he asked. "Yes," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "For a week." He nodded, typed something into an aging computer, and slid a form toward me. "That'll be cash or card." "Cash." I handed over the bills, watching them disappear into the drawer with a tightness in my chest that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with fear. "Room 212, he said, passing me a key. "I'm Frank." "Sarah," I replied. The room was small but functional. A double bed with a faded floral comforter, a desk that had seen better decades, a bathroom with questionable water pressure, and a mirror that made no effort to flatter. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the walls. This was it. This was my life now. The first night, I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Marcus's voice, dead weight, embarrassing, looping endlessly in my mind. By morning, exhaustion had settled into my bones, heavy and dull. I spent the next 2 weeks applying for jobs. Marketing positions first, then administrative roles, then anything that would pay enough to keep the room a little longer. I rewrote my resume a dozen times, trying to explain away the 7-year gap without sounding defensive or desperate. It didn't matter. Polite emails arrived like clockwork. "We've decided to move forward with other candidates. Your experience is impressive, but we're looking for someone with more recent industry involvement." Recent, as if I'd been asleep instead of supporting someone else's ambitions. I took interviews anyway, dressing carefully, smiling when expected, nodding at the right moments. Each one ended the same way, with a handshake, a practiced smile, and the quiet certainty that I wouldn't hear from them again. Back at the Riverside Inn, Frank started to notice. On my 3rd week, I counted out cash at the desk, my fingers lingering over the last few bills longer than they should have. "You doing all right, Miss Sarah?" he asked, not unkindly. "I'm fine," I said quickly. "Just between things." He nodded slowly. "We've got a special rate starting next month. Might help stretch your budget." The concern in his voice made my throat tighten. I thanked him and escaped to my room before the tears could fall. That night, I called Rachel. We'd been inseparable in college, late-night study sessions, cheap wine, big dreams. Marcus had never liked her. Said she was too negative, not the kind of influence we needed. Translation: she saw through him. "Sarah?" she exclaimed when she answered. "Where have you been? I've been calling you for months." Her voice broke something open inside me. I told her everything. The humiliation, the affair, the money, the hotel. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, there was a long, heavy silence on the line. "That absolute jerk," she said finally. "I never liked him." I laughed weakly. "I know. Come stay with me," she said immediately. "I've got a spare room. You don't even have to ask." "I can't," I replied, the word tumbling out before I could think. "I don't want to be a burden." "You're not a burden," she said firmly. "You're my friend." But pride is a strange thing. Even stripped of everything else, it clung to me stubbornly. I promised I'd think about it and hung up, feeling both comforted and ashamed. The days blurred together after that. Wake up, apply for jobs, walk around the city pretending I had somewhere to be, return to room 212 and stare at the ceiling. One evening, I opened my laptop and scrolled through social media without thinking. A photo stopped me cold. Marcus, at a corporate event, smiling. Vanessa at his side, her hand resting possessively on his arm. The caption praised his leadership and recent successes. I closed the laptop and sat in the dark, anger finally cutting through the numbness. He hadn't just kicked me out. He'd erased me. Rewritten our story so it looked like I'd never mattered. That night, as I sorted through the few boxes I'd brought with me, my hand brushed against something familiar and solid. My father's wallet. I froze, my fingers resting on the worn leather. I hadn't meant to bring it. It must have slipped into my bag without me noticing, tucked away among old papers and keepsakes. For a long moment, I just stared at it. My father had always believed in being prepared. "You don't wait for trouble to arrive," he used to say. "You prepare quietly." At the time, I'd thought he meant spare tires and emergency kits. Sitting alone in that small hotel room, with my life reduced to a suitcase and a dwindling stack of bills, I wondered if he'd meant something more. And for the first time since Marcus told me to pack my things, a flicker of something unfamiliar stirred beneath the fear. Not hope. Not yet. But the sense that the story wasn't finished with me after all. Room 212 had a way of shrinking at night. During the day, it felt merely small, temporary. But after sunset, when the thin curtains failed to block the orange glow of the parking lot lights, the walls seemed to inch closer, as if the room itself were listening to my thoughts and tightening in response. I lay on the bed fully dressed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every decision that had led me here. 7 years. 7 years of choosing us over me. I used to wake up early, energized by deadlines and ideas, excited about campaigns I believed in. Back then, my mind felt sharp, purposeful. Now, thoughts came slowly, dulled by rejection emails and long stretches of silence. Each morning, I forced myself into a routine. Wake up, shower, put on clothes that suggested confidence I didn't feel. I applied to jobs from the small desk by the window, my laptop balanced between a chipped lamp and a stack of rejection letters I hadn't yet thrown away. I rewrote cover letters obsessively, trying to explain the unexplainable gap in my career. 7 years supporting my husband's career. It sounded noble in my head. On paper it looked like an excuse. Interviews were worse. I sat across from hiring managers who nodded sympathetically while their eyes flicked back to my resume, lingering on the dates that told them everything they needed to know. "So," one woman said gently, folding her hands on the table, "can you explain this employment gap?" I smiled. I always smiled. I relocated for my spouse's job and took time to focus on family responsibilities. She smiled back, professional and distant. "And now you're ready to re-enter the workforce?" "Yes," I said quickly. Too quickly. I've always been ready. The truth was harder to say. I didn't know who I was professionally anymore. I knew how to manage a household, how to host flawless dinners, how to read a room, and adapt myself into whatever made someone else comfortable. But those skills didn't show up neatly in bullet points. When rejection emails arrived, I read them twice before closing the tab, as if a different outcome might appear if I stared long enough. At night, exhaustion set in. Not the kind that came from hard work, but the heavy fatigue of uncertainty. I'd lie awake listening to distant traffic, wondering how close I was to the edge. Wondering how long pride would keep me from calling Rachel back. I walked the city during the afternoons, not because I had anywhere to go, but because sitting still made the fear louder. I memorized the cracks in the sidewalks, the rhythm of crosswalk signals, the quiet routines of strangers who didn't know they were passing someone in freefall. Once, I caught my reflection in a store window and barely recognized the woman staring back. Her shoulders slumped slightly forward as if bracing for impact. Her eyes held a constant question she couldn't answer. When did I become this small? I stopped checking social media after that. Marcus's world continued without me, polished and intact. My absence hadn't slowed him down. It had streamlined him. The realization settled slowly, painfully. He hadn't lost anything when he lost me. That night, I finally called Rachel again. "I can't do this alone," I said as soon as she answered, my voice cracking. "Good," she replied without hesitation. "You shouldn't have to." She offered her spare room again, her words warm and certain. I nearly said yes. I almost let myself imagine unpacking my suitcase somewhere that smelled like familiarity instead of disinfectant, but fear whispered louder. If I accepted help, it meant admitting I'd failed, that I'd misjudged my marriage, my choices, myself. It meant letting go of the last illusion that I was still in control. "I just need a little more time," I said finally. Rachel sighed, not in frustration, but in concern. "Just promise me you won't disappear again." "I promise." After we hung up, I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the closed door. The room felt impossibly quiet. I opened my laptop and checked my bank balance again, even though I already knew the number. $134.62. The digits blurred together. I calculated again. Hotel fees, food, transportation. The math didn't work. No amount of optimism could stretch it far enough. For the first time since Marcus kicked me out, panic broke through the numbness. What if I didn't find a job? What if Patricia couldn't recover the money? What if this was it? I pressed my palms into my eyes, trying to steady my breathing. That was when I remembered the wallet. My father's wallet sat on the desk where I'd left it days earlier, the worn leather catching the light from the lamp. I hadn't opened it yet. Part of me was afraid to. Afraid of stirring grief I'd carefully packed away after his funeral. Dad had been steady. Predictable. The kind of man who believed in planning, in quiet preparation. When he died, the world had felt less secure, as if the ground beneath me had shifted slightly off-center. I picked up the wallet and turned it over in my hands. "Just look," I whispered to myself. "Just look." I opened it slowly. His driver's license stared back at me, the photo exactly as I remembered, slightly annoyed, as if he'd been inconvenienced by the process. A folded picture of my mother on their wedding day rested behind it, her smile radiant and hopeful. I smiled through the ache in my chest. Tucked behind a stack of old receipts and a faded lottery ticket was something I didn't recognize. A card. Not plastic. Metallic. Cool and heavier than it should have been. My father's name was embossed across the front in silver letters. Jonathan Mitchell. No bank logo. No expiration date. Just a series of numbers that meant nothing to me. I frowned, turning it over. It didn't make sense. My father had been practical to a fault. He drove cars until they fell apart, reused envelopes, and clipped coupons even when he didn't need to. This card didn't belong to that man. For a moment I wondered if it was some kind of old promotional item. Something meaningless he'd forgotten to throw away. But the weight of it, the understated design, it felt intentional. Important. I set it on the desk and stared at it, my thoughts racing. It was probably expired. Probably useless. Probably nothing. Still, something about it made my pulse quicken. Desperation does strange things to the mind. It convinces you to notice details you'd once dismiss. It whispers what if when logic says don't bother. I slid the card back into the wallet and tucked it into my purse, not because I planned to use it. Not yet. But because something inside me, some instinct I'd ignored for years, told me not to leave it behind. I lay back on the bed, the room quiet again. But the silence felt different now, charged, expectant. For weeks I'd been waiting for something to change. An email, a call, a miracle. I hadn't considered the possibility that the change might already be with me. And as sleep finally claimed me that night, one thought lingered, gentle but persistent. What if my father had prepared for this? Even when I hadn't? Morning arrived quietly, the way it always did at the Riverside Inn. No alarms, no rush. Just the hum of distant traffic and the soft rattle of a housekeeping cart somewhere down the hall. I woke with the strange sensation that something had changed. For a few seconds, I couldn't remember what it was. Then my eyes landed on my purse, sitting upright on the chair beside the desk, and the memory rushed back in, metallic, heavy, impossible to ignore. The card. I sat up slowly, heart thudding harder than it should have for something so small. Sunlight filtered through the thin curtains, catching dust particles in the air, making the room feel suspended between moments. I reached for the purse and pulled out my father's wallet again, turning it over in my hands like it might answer questions I didn't yet know how to ask. "Dad," I murmured, my voice barely audible. "What were you hiding?" He'd never been a secretive man. At least, not in the way people usually meant it. He believed in privacy, yes, but his life had been simple, predictable. City engineer. Same job for decades. Same modest house. Same routines. He was the kind of man who fixed things instead of replacing them, who planned vacations months in advance, who kept receipts filed in neat folders. That was why the card unsettled me. I slid it out again, letting it rest on my palm. The metal felt cool, reassuringly solid. It wasn't flashy. No logo. No branding. Just his name and numbers. Understated and deliberate. It didn't belong to desperation. It belonged to foresight. I tried to remember anything, any hint that might explain it. Late-night phone calls. Unusual trips. Sudden windfalls. But there was nothing. If my father had lived a double life, he'd hidden it flawlessly. I tucked the card back into the wallet and set it down, suddenly afraid of what I might uncover if I looked too closely. Some things I told myself were better left alone. The rest of the day passed in a haze. I walked aimlessly through the city, the wallet heavy in my bag like a secret I wasn't ready to share. Every time my hand brushed against it, a jolt of awareness shot through me. I found myself scanning faces, buildings, signs, as if the world might reveal something if I paid enough attention. By afternoon, my phone buzzed with another rejection email. I stopped reading halfway through. The familiar ache rose in my chest, sharp and persistent. The math replayed itself again, merciless and exact. 2 days, maybe 3. Then what? Back at the hotel, I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the peeling paint near the window. The room felt smaller than ever, pressing in on me from all sides. I reached for the wallet again. "Just once," I whispered. "Just to see." I slipped the card out and turned it over slowly, examining every detail. The numbers were crisp, untouched by wear. The edges smooth. This wasn't something that had been used often, if at all. The idea came uninvited, fully formed and terrifying. What if I tried it? I laughed softly at myself. The sound brittle. Don't be ridiculous. Using it would be wrong. Possibly illegal. The account was probably closed, the card long expired. At best, it would be declined. At worst, I'd end up explaining myself to authorities who wouldn't care about desperation or sentiment. Still, the thought wouldn't leave. My father had kept the wallet. He hadn't destroyed the card. He'd carried it with him, quietly for years. If it meant nothing, why keep it at all? I thought of his voice, calm and steady. You don't wait for trouble to arrive. You prepare quietly. Prepare for what? That night, I barely slept. I dreamed of doors opening and closing, of keys that fit locks I didn't recognize. When I woke before dawn, the decision felt less like a choice and more like momentum. I dressed carefully, choosing the cleanest clothes I had left: jeans, a sweater, shoes that still looked respectable, despite the worn soles. I tucked the wallet into my purse and paused by the door, my hand resting on the handle. If this went wrong, it could make everything worse. If it went right, I didn't even know what that would look like. The front desk was quiet when I approached. Frank looked up from his computer, offering the same gentle smile he always did. "Morning, Miss Sarah." "Morning," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'd like to check out." "Just for now." He nodded, typing. "Checking out early?" "Yes," I said. "I need to take care of something." He glanced at me, his eyes lingering just long enough to suggest he knew this wasn't just about logistics. "That'll be $312 for the balance." My pulse picked up. I reached into my purse and pulled out the wallet. My fingers hesitated for half a second before sliding the card free. "I'll use this," I said, placing it on the counter. Frank picked it up without comment and swiped it through the aging machine. The device whirred, and kept whirring. The seconds stretched. I held my breath, waiting for the familiar beep of rejection. Declined. Insufficient funds. Error. Instead, the screen froze. Frank frowned, tapping the side of the machine lightly. "That's odd." My stomach dropped. "Is there a problem?" He didn't answer right away. He leaned closer to the screen, then looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time. "Ma'am," he said slowly, "I'm going to need to make a call." My chest tightened. "Frank, if the card doesn't work, I can pay cash." "It's not that," he said, already reaching for the phone. "Please wait here." The phone rang once, twice. Frank's expression changed as he listened, his posture straightening, the casual warmth in his demeanor replaced by something sharper, more alert. He murmured a few words I couldn't hear, then covered the receiver and turned back to me. "Miss Mitchell," he said quietly, "would you mind coming into the office?" The sound of my name made everything feel suddenly unreal. "Am the first in trouble?" I asked. He shook his head. "I don't think so. But someone needs to speak with you." My legs felt unsteady as I followed him into the small back office, the air thick with the smell of old coffee and paper. Frank gestured for me to sit, then handed me the phone. "Hello?" I said, my voice barely more than a whisper. "Am I speaking with Sarah Mitchell?" The voice on the other end was crisp, authoritative. "Yes, Miss Mitchell, my name is Richard Ashworth. I'm calling from Cordell Private Banking. You've just attempted to use a card linked to the Jonathan Mitchell Estate Trust." My breath caught. "Estate Trust. I'm sorry," I stammered. "My father passed away. I didn't know." "Please, listen carefully," he interrupted, not unkindly. "The card is active. However, its use has triggered a mandatory review. I need you to come to our offices immediately." "A review?" I asked, my heart racing. "What kind of review?" "One that requires your presence," he replied. "Can you be here within the hour?" I looked at the phone in my hand, then at Frank, who watched silently from across the room. "Yes," I said. "I can." "Good," Ashworth replied. "Bring the card with you. And Miss Mitchell, do not attempt to use it again until we speak in person." The line went dead. I sat there, stunned, the phone still pressed to my ear. Frank cleared his throat. "Looks like you've got somewhere important to be." I nodded slowly, my thoughts racing. The card hadn't just worked. It had woken something up. As Frank locked up the office and grabbed his coat, offering to drive me, one truth settled deep in my chest. Whatever my father had prepared for, I was standing at the very edge of it. Frank's car smelled faintly of peppermint and old leather. It was the kind of smell that suggested habit. Someone who kept mints in the glove compartment and cleaned the seats himself. As he pulled out of the Riverside Inn parking lot, I watched the building recede in the side mirror, its flickering sign blinking like a farewell I wasn't ready to return. "You don't have to do this," Frank said gently, keeping his eyes on the road. "If you'd rather take a cab." "No," I replied quickly. "Thank you, I appreciate it." My hands rested in my lap, fingers interlaced tightly around my purse. The wallet felt heavier now, as if it had absorbed the tension of the phone call. My heart hadn't slowed since Richard Ashworth's voice cut through the line, formal and unmistakably important. Cordell Private Banking. The name echoed in my mind, unfamiliar yet loaded with significance. I'd never heard my father mention it. Never seen a letter, a statement, a hint that his life intersected with anything so exclusive. The city changed as we drove. Familiar storefronts gave way to polished buildings of glass and stone. The streets grew quieter, cleaner, the kind of quiet that came from money moving silently behind closed doors. Frank pulled up in front of a tall, understated building with a simple brass plaque near the entrance. No flashy signage, no advertising, just authority. "You sure you're all right, Miss Sarah?" he asked, parking. I nodded, though I wasn't sure it was true. "I will be." Inside, the lobby felt like another world. Marble floors gleamed beneath soft lighting. The air smelled faintly of citrus and something else I couldn't place. Confidence, maybe. Conversations were muted, voices low and controlled. People here didn't rush. They expected time to bend around them. A receptionist looked up as I approached. "May the first help you?" "My name is Sarah Mitchell," I said. "I'm here to see Richard Ashworth." Her fingers paused over the keyboard for just a fraction of a second before she smiled. "Of course, Miss Mitchell. He's expecting you." Expecting. She handed me a visitor badge and gestured toward a set of elevators. Top floor. As the doors slid closed, my reflection stared back at me, wide-eyed, pale, unmistakably out of place. I smoothed my sweater, suddenly aware of every crease, every scuff on my shoes. The elevator opened into a quiet corridor lined with abstract art. A man in a tailored suit waited near a glass door, his posture relaxed but alert. "Miss Mitchell," he said, extending his hand. "Richard Ashworth." His handshake was firm, confident. He carried himself like someone used to delivering news that changed lives. "Thank you for coming so quickly," he said, guiding me into a spacious conference room that overlooked the city. "Can I get you anything? Coffee? Water?" "I just want to understand what's happening," I said. He nodded, taking a seat across from me. "Of course." He opened a folder, sliding it toward me, though my eyes barely registered the documents inside. My attention was fixed on his face, searching for clues. "Your father, Jonathan Mitchell, established an estate trust with this institution 27 years ago," he began. "The card you used this morning is directly linked to that trust. 27 years. I swallowed hard. My father was a city engineer. We lived modestly. There must be some mistake. "There isn't," Ashworth replied calmly. "Your father made a series of exceptionally successful investments early in his career. Rather than altering his lifestyle, he chose to secure your future." "My future?" My voice trembled. "Yes," he said. "The trust was designed to remain dormant until very specific conditions were met." He slid a single page toward me. "It activates only if the card is used after both parents' passing, and during a period of genuine financial hardship." The words blurred together as tears welled in my eyes. "He planned for me to fail?" Ashworth shook his head. "No. He planned for you to live freely, without knowing this safety net existed. He didn't want money to shape your choices." I stared at the numbers on the page, convinced I was misreading them. "This says..." I trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. $43 million, Ashworth said gently. "Approximately." The room tilted. I gripped the edge of the table, my pulse roaring in my ears. Before I could process the magnitude of it, Ashworth's expression shifted, subtle but unmistakable. "There's something else," he said. My stomach tightened. "What?" "When the card was used this morning, it triggered an automatic system-to-wide review of all dormant high-value accounts." I frowned. "Why?" "Because someone had been attempting to access your father's trust." The air left my lungs. "Who?" "Your husband," Ashworth said. "Marcus Webb." The name landed like a physical blow. Ashworth continued, his tone precise and controlled. "For the past 8 months, Mr. Webb has been working with a compromised employee to obtain information about the trust. The plan was to gain access during the divorce proceedings and move the funds offshore." I stared at him, stunned. He didn't even know about the money when we were married. He discovered its existence through estate documents, Ashworth replied. Your use of the card this morning shut everything down, accounts frozen, internal investigation launched, authorities notified. I laughed once, short and disbelieving. So my swipe exposed an ongoing fraud operation, he finished. Yes. Tears spilled down my cheeks, but they weren't just grief or anger. They were release. My father protected me, I whispered. He did, Ashworth said. Even now. He slid another envelope across the table. He also left you a letter, to be opened when the trust activated. My hands shook as I opened it, my father's familiar handwriting greeting me like a voice from another room. As I read, the walls around me seemed to fade. If you're reading this, it means you needed help. By the time I finished, I was sobbing openly, clutching the letter to my chest. Ashworth gave me space, quietly reviewing papers while I tried to breathe through the weight of my father's foresight and love. When I finally looked up, he met my eyes. The bank employee involved has already resigned, he said. Your husband is currently being questioned. For the first time since Marcus told me to pack my things, I felt something shift. Not revenge. Relief. The system that had tried to erase me had tripped over itself instead. And it all started with a single transaction that refused to stay small. The conference room felt too quiet after the truth landed. $43 million. A dormant trust. A father I thought I knew. Revealed in layers I was only beginning to understand. I sat motionless, my father's letter trembling slightly in my hands, as if the paper itself carried the aftershocks of everything it had just unlocked. Richard Ashworth waited patiently across the table, giving me the space to breathe, to grieve, to recalibrate the shape of my reality. I don't understand, I said finally, my voice hoarse. Why wouldn't he tell me? Why live the way we did if all of this existed? Ashworth leaned back slightly, folding his hands. Your father was very clear about that. He didn't believe wealth should arrive before character. I looked up at him. He told us, Ashworth continued, that money has a way of becoming a crutch. He didn't want you leaning on it before you learned how to stand on your own. A sharp ache bloomed in my chest. Memories rushed in. My father teaching me how to budget in college, insisting I work summer jobs even when he could have helped, reminding me that comfort earned felt different from comfort given. He watched you carefully, Ashworth added. From a distance. He was proud of you long before this card was ever used. The room blurred again as tears welled. I wiped them away quickly, embarrassed by how easily they came. I failed, I said quietly. I let someone reduce me to nothing. Ashworth shook his head. You lived. You loved. You sacrificed. That isn't failure. I thought of Marcus's words, dead weight, and felt something inside me stiffen, harden into resolve. My father knew, I said. It wasn't a question. Yes, Ashworth replied. Not the specifics. But the possibility. He slid another document toward me. This was written years ago. An addendum to the trust. I read the highlighted lines slowly. In the event that my daughter finds herself financially vulnerable due to dependence on another party, the trust shall activate without penalty or delay. My breath caught. He anticipated this, I whispered. Not Marcus, Ashworth said gently, but the risk of dependence. Your father believed love should never cost you your safety. I pressed my fingers against the paper, grounding myself. For years I'd questioned my instincts. Wondered if I was too cautious, too sensitive, too slow to adapt. Now I saw it clearly. My father hadn't raised me to be small. He'd raised me to survive. And survive I had. There's more you should know, Ashworth said. My heart lurched. More? When the system flagged the fraudulent access attempts, we conducted a full internal audit, he explained. What we found wasn't just isolated misconduct. He stood and walked to the window, gazing out over the city. Your husband had positioned himself carefully. The divorce, the timing, the attempt to drain joint accounts. It wasn't impulsive. I closed my eyes. He planned to leave me with nothing. Yes, Ashworth said, and he would have succeeded, if the trust hadn't been designed the way it was. I let out a shaky laugh, more disbelief than humor. All this time I thought I was unprepared. You were prepared, Ashworth corrected. You just didn't know it. He returned to his seat and opened another folder. Your father also established a contingency protocol, legal representation, financial advisors, security measures. All set to activate once the trust did. Security? I repeated. Discreet, he assured me. But necessary, given the amount involved. The magnitude of it pressed down on me, heavy and surreal. My father hadn't just saved money. He'd built an entire framework, quiet, patient, waiting for me. Do you know what the hardest part is? I asked suddenly. Ashworth looked at me. What's that? I spent years thinking I was behind. Watching other women build careers, make bold choices, become impressive. My voice wavered. I thought I'd wasted time. And now? He asked. Now I realize I was being protected. Even when I didn't know it. Ashworth smiled softly. Your father would have liked that interpretation. He gathered the documents neatly. There are practical matters we'll need to address. Access, management, legal, proceedings regarding your husband. But none of that needs to happen today. I nodded, grateful. One more thing, he said, hesitating slightly. The letter you read. There's a second one. My breath caught. Another? He slid a smaller envelope across the table. This one was meant to be given only after the first was read. Your father believed some truths needed context. I opened it slowly. Sarah, if you've come this far, it means you've learned something painful, but important. I want you to understand why your mother and I chose silence. We grew up watching money change people, turn kindness into entitlement, turn love into leverage. We promised ourselves that if we ever had more than we needed, it would never become the reason you doubted yourself. We wanted you to choose your life without fear, and without greed. If someone ever made you feel small, know this. It was never because you were. It was because they were afraid of what you might become, if you remembered your worth. You don't owe anyone your gratitude for surviving them. Live gently, live bravely, and never mistake patience for weakness. Dad? I folded the letter carefully, my hands steady now. For the first time since the kitchen confrontation, Marcus's voice faded into insignificance. His words no longer echoed. They had no place to land. What happens next? I asked. Ashworth's expression turned professional again. We secure the trust. We ensure your husband faces the consequences of his actions. And we help you decide what kind of future you want. I considered that. For years my future had been framed by someone else's ambition, someone else's expectations. Now, the horizon felt open, terrifying, exhilarating. I don't want to disappear into this, I said slowly. I don't want money to become my identity. Ashworth nodded approvingly. That aligns perfectly with your father's wishes. I stood, smoothing my sweater, feeling taller than I had in weeks. Thank you, I said, for telling me the truth. He inclined his head. It was always meant to be yours. As Frank waited downstairs to take me back to the hotel, I paused in the lobby, my reflection catching in the polished glass. The woman staring back looked different, not richer, stronger. I wasn't rescued by money. I was revealed by it. And as the doors closed behind me, one truth settled firmly in my chest. My father hadn't saved me from failure. He'd saved me from myself. The relief I felt leaving Cordell Private Banking didn't arrive all at once. It came in fragments, short breaths that didn't catch in my throat, steps that felt steadier on the marble floor, the strange realization that the weight pressing on my chest had shifted. It wasn't gone, but it had moved, rearranged itself into something I could finally carry. Frank was waiting by the curb, leaning against his car with his hands in his pockets. He straightened when he saw me. Concern etched into his face. You okay? He asked. I nodded slowly. I think I will be. He didn't press for details. He simply opened the passenger door, and we pulled back into the stream of traffic, the city resuming its indifferent rhythm around us. For a few minutes, neither of us spoke. Then my phone buzzed. Once, Twice. Again. I stared at the screen, my stomach tightening as I saw the name. Marcus. I hadn't heard from him since the night he told me to pack my things. No messages, no calls. Just silence. Until now, I didn't answer. Another buzz. Then another. Frank glanced over. Everything all right? Yes, I said quickly, though my pulse said otherwise. Just something I need to deal with. The phone buzzed again, followed by a text message that appeared on the screen like a demand. We need to talk. Now. I let out a slow breath and turned the phone face down. For once, I didn't feel the instinctive urge to explain myself. To soften. To accommodate. The truth was already moving faster than he was. Back at the Riverside Inn, Frank insisted on carrying my bag up to the room. I thanked him, meaning it more deeply than words could capture. Whatever you're dealing with, he said gently, you've got people on your side. I watched him leave, then closed the door behind me and leaned against it, the familiar hum of the room settling around me. My phone buzzed again. This time, I answered. What? I said, my voice calm in a way that surprised me. Where are you? Marcus snapped. The irritation in his tone was unmistakable. I've been calling you for hours. I've been busy, I replied. Busy doing what? He demanded. I smiled faintly. Handling things you don't need to worry about. There was a pause on the line. You used the card. The words sent a chill through me. I know you did, he continued quickly. Someone from the bank contacted me. They froze an account I was managing. The audacity of it would have been laughable if it hadn't been so revealing. You were managing my father's trust? I asked quietly. Another pause. Longer this time. I was protecting us, Marcus said finally. You wouldn't understand how these things work. I closed my eyes, a wave of clarity washing over me. You were stealing from me, I said. That's not fair, he shot back. You didn't even know it existed. That doesn't make it yours. His voice hardened. You owe me, Sarah. After everything I've done for you. The familiar accusation tried to worm its way into my chest, but it found no purchase this time. I don't owe you anything, I replied. And you should stop calling me. He laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. You think you've won? You have no idea what you've just stepped into. I know exactly what I've stepped into, I said. The truth. I ended the call before he could respond. My phone buzzed again immediately, but I silenced it and set it face down on the desk. For the first time, Marcus sounded afraid. The knock came an hour later. 3 sharp raps on the door. My heart skipped, but I didn't move. I stood perfectly still, listening as another knock followed, then another. Sarah? Marcus called through the door. Open up. I didn't answer. I know you're in there, he continued. We need to talk like adults. Adults. The word tasted bitter. Go away, I said loudly enough for him to hear. There was a long silence, then the sound of footsteps retreating down the hallway. I exhaled slowly, my legs trembling. That night, sleep came in fragments. Each time I drifted off, images surfaced. Bank offices, locked doors, my father's steady gaze. But beneath the unease, something else pulsed steadily. Resolve. The next morning, Richard Ashworth called. Miss Mitchell, he said. I wanted to update you. I braced myself. About Marcus? Yes. He was formally questioned last night. The evidence against him is substantial. My chest tightened. What happens now? Charges are being prepared. Attempted fraud, conspiracy. The employee who assisted him has provided a full confession. I sank onto the edge of the bed. The room spinning slightly. He really was going to take everything, I whispered. Yes, Ashworth said. He planned to hide the funds during the divorce proceedings and leave you with no claim. The betrayal cut deep, but it no longer surprised me. Thank you for telling me, I said. One more thing, he added. Your husband attempted to contact us again this morning. We've instructed all staff to direct communication through legal channels only. Of course he had. When the call ended, I sat in silence, letting the truth settle fully this time. Marcus hadn't just failed me as a husband. He'd revealed himself as someone willing to dismantle me completely, financially, legally, emotionally, if it meant preserving his own image. That knowledge hurt. But it also freed me. Later that afternoon, Rachel arrived. She didn't ask questions at first. She simply pulled me into a hug so tight I could barely breathe. "I saw his face on the news," she said quietly. My heart jumped. "The news?" She nodded. "Local business segment. Something about a legal investigation. They didn't name names, but I recognized him." I laughed softly, a sound edged with disbelief. "I guess secrets don't stay hidden forever." Rachel pulled back, studying my face. "You're different." "I feel different," I admitted. She smiled. "Good. It suits you." We sat together on the bed, the small room suddenly feeling less suffocating. That evening, as I watched the sun dip below the skyline, my phone buzzed one last time. A message from an unknown number. "You ruined everything." I stared at it for a long moment, then deleted it without replying. Because the truth was simple, and it no longer frightened me. I hadn't ruined anything. I'd uncovered it. And the man who tried to erase me had finally exposed himself instead. The room was quiet in a way that felt earned. Not empty. Not hollow. Just still. Rachel had stepped out to give me space, and for the first time since everything unraveled, I was alone without feeling lonely. The afternoon light filtered through the thin curtains, softening the edges of the room, turning the worn furniture into something gentler than it had been that morning. On the desk in front of me lay the envelope. My father's handwriting curved across it, familiar and steady, as if he'd written it yesterday instead of years ago. I traced the letters with my finger, a small unconscious gesture that made my throat tighten. I'd already read one letter. This one felt heavier, like a final conversation. I sat down slowly, breathing in, then out, and opened it. "My dearest Sarah, if you're reading this now, it means the world has finally pushed you into a corner I always hoped you'd never see, but prepared for anyway. I wish I were there with you. I wish I could make you tea, tell you a bad joke, and remind you that none of this changes who you are. But since I can't, I'll say what matters most." I swallowed hard, my vision blurring. "You were never meant to be small. I saw it in you from the beginning. The way you questioned things, the way you noticed people others overlooked, the way you tried to hold everything together even when it cost you. That instinct to care will serve you well in life. But only if you learn when to stop giving it to people who drain you." Tears slipped down my cheeks, silent and steady. If someone made you feel like a burden, it's because they never learned how to carry anything but themselves. I paused, pressing the letter to my chest. Marcus's voice tried to surface, dead weight, but it couldn't survive the weight of my father's words. "Your mother worried about you, you know. Not because she doubted your strength, but because she knew how deeply you loved. We talked many nights about how to protect that softness without hardening your heart. Money was never the answer. Distance wasn't either. Time was." I smiled through my tears. My parents had always believed in time, patience, growth. Letting things unfold instead of forcing them. "That card you used?" I carried it for years. Not because I planned to use it, but because it reminded me of a promise I made the day you were born. To make sure that no matter what happened, you'd never be trapped. My breath caught. Not trapped by fear. Not trapped by dependence. Not trapped by someone else's idea of your worth. I reached for a tissue, my hands shaking. If you feel embarrassed right now, please don't. There is no shame in surviving something that tried to shrink you. Strength doesn't always look like standing tall. Sometimes it looks like bending long enough not to break. I let the words settle, each one stitching something back together inside me. I hope this money gives you room, not to become someone new, but to return to who you were before the world started making demands. Use it carefully, use it kindly. And when you can, use it to lift someone else who feels invisible. I thought of Frank at the front desk, of Rachel's arms around me, of the women I'd met at charity events who smiled politely while hiding their own quiet battles. Above all, Sarah, remember this. Love should never cost you your dignity. If it does, it isn't love. My chest heaved as the truth of that sentence sank in. Live well, laugh often, travel somewhere beautiful and unexpected. And when you doubt yourself, as we all do, remember that your mother and I believed in you long before you ever had to prove anything. We still do. Always. Love. Dad. The letter slipped from my fingers onto my lap as a sob broke free, deep and unrestrained. I cried for the years I'd spent trying to earn approval that should have been freely given. For the woman I'd been before I learned to make myself smaller. For the father who had loved me so thoroughly that he'd planned for my worst days without ever telling me. I cried until the tears slowed, and the ache softened into something warm and steady. Gratitude. When I finally stood, the room felt different. Not because it had changed, but because I had. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back into the envelope, then tucked it inside my purse next to the wallet. Not hidden, not forgotten, just close. Rachel returned quietly, reading my face before saying a word. "You okay?" she asked. I nodded. "I will be." She smiled and squeezed my hand. "Your dad sounds like he was incredible." "He was," I said. "And he still is, in a way." That night, I slept deeply for the first time in weeks. No looping arguments, no imagined conversations, just rest. In the morning, I woke with clarity instead of dread. The money was real. The betrayal was real. But so was the future. And for the first time it felt like mine to shape. As sunlight spilled into the room, one final thought settled gently in my chest. I hadn't lost everything. I'd been given something back. Change didn't arrive with fireworks. It came quietly, the way dawn slips in without announcing itself, soft at first, then undeniable. 2 weeks after the meeting at Cordell Private Banking, I stood in the middle of a small sunlit apartment and inhaled deeply. The place wasn't grand. No sweeping views, no marble floors, just clean lines, warm light, and a neighborhood that hummed with life instead of ambition. It felt like choice. For the first time in years, every decision belonged to me. I unpacked slowly, deliberately. Each item I placed on a shelf or folded into a drawer felt like a small act of reclamation. My books lined the wall again, their spines familiar and comforting. My grandmother's quilt found a home at the foot of the bed, its presence grounding and steady. I didn't rush to buy new things. I didn't feel the need to fill the space with proof that I could. The absence of excess felt intentional, like breathing room. Rachel visited often, usually with groceries I hadn't asked for, and commentary I hadn't known I'd missed. "You look lighter," she said one afternoon, dropping onto the couch. "Not happier exactly. Just clearer." "I feel clearer," I admitted. "Like I'm finally hearing my own thoughts again." She grinned. "Took you long enough." I laughed, the sound easy and unforced. The legal proceedings moved forward quietly. Marcus's name surfaced in places he never expected: documents, investigations, whispered conversations he could no longer control. I didn't attend every meeting. I didn't need to. Knowing the truth was enough. Vanessa left him before the charges became public. Rachel relayed the news casually, as if mentioning the weather. "Guess ambition has limits," she said. I felt no satisfaction in it. Only a distant sense of closure. Instead of focusing on what I'd lost, I turned my attention to what I wanted to build. I enrolled in a master's program for nonprofit management, a decision that surprised even me. But as soon as I filled out the application, it felt right. I'd spent years organizing events, coordinating people, smoothing chaos behind the scenes. I wanted to use those skills intentionally, for causes that mattered. Orientation day arrived sooner than expected. Sitting in a classroom again felt surreal at first, but the familiar rhythm returned quickly. Discussions, ideas, purpose. I wasn't behind. I was seasoned. I also reconnected with people Marcus had slowly edged out of my life. Old friends. Former colleagues. Conversations picked up where they'd left off, as if time hadn't erased as much as I'd feared. One afternoon, at a small coffee shop near campus, a man asked if the seat across from me was taken. "Not anymore," I replied. We talked about books, about travel, about nothing particularly important. And that was the point. There was no pressure to impress, no performance required. When he complimented my choice of reading material instead of my appearance, I smiled. I took things slowly. For the first time, I could afford to. The money remained mostly untouched, invested carefully, growing quietly. I met with advisors, asked questions, learned without surrendering control. I funded a scholarship in my parents' names, donated to organizations that helped women rebuild after difficult transitions. Each decision felt aligned, not reactive. One evening I sat on my balcony as the city lights flickered on, a mug of tea warming my hands. The air was cool, steady, peaceful. I thought of the woman I'd been in that rain-soaked kitchen, confused, humiliated, convinced she'd failed. She hadn't failed. She'd endured. And endurance, I realized, wasn't the opposite of success. It was often the foundation of it. Rachel joined me, leaning against the railing. "Paris next spring," she said casually. I smiled. "Yeah. Paris." My mother's voice echoed faintly in my memory. "Don't wait forever to live." "I think they'd be proud," Rachel added. "I think so too," I said softly. As night settled in, I felt something rare and precious, contentment without fear. I wasn't chasing validation anymore. I wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone. I was simply becoming. And for the first time, that felt like more than enough. Some endings don't arrive with applause. They arrive quietly, like a door closing behind you without a sound, leaving you standing in a space that feels unfamiliar, open, and finally yours. Months after everything unraveled, I found myself walking through the city at dusk. The same streets that once felt overwhelming now unfolding at an easy pace. The buildings hadn't changed. The traffic hadn't softened. But something inside me had shifted so completely that the world no longer felt like it was closing in. I thought about that night in the rain. The suitcase. The word dead weight, thrown so carelessly, as if it were a fact instead of a lie. Back then, I believed him. That belief had been the most damaging thing of all. It's strange how easily we accept the judgments of people we love, especially when we've invested years trying to make them happy. We tell ourselves that if someone who knows us so well sees us as lacking, then maybe they're right. But love that requires you to disappear is not love. It's control. I didn't discover my worth the day the bank shut down. I discovered it when I realized how carefully it had been protected all along. My father hadn't left me money, he'd left me permission. Permission to walk away from what diminished me. Permission to start over without shame. Permission to build a life based on values instead of survival. And here's the truth I wish someone had told me sooner. Starting over doesn't mean you failed. It means you refused to stay where you were shrinking. Marcus lost everything he tried to steal. Not because I took revenge, but because truth has a way of collapsing lies under their own weight. I gained something far more valuable than financial security. I gained clarity. I learned that strength doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it looks like staying quiet long enough to understand what's happening to you. Sometimes it looks like walking away without needing the other person to admit they were wrong. And sometimes, when you're very lucky, it looks like discovering that someone loved you enough to plan for the moment you'd need help the most. If you're listening to this story and you feel stuck, if you've been made to feel like a burden, if you're carrying shame for choices you made just to survive, please hear this clearly. You are not behind. You are not weak. And you are not defined by who failed to see your value. You may be standing in the middle of a chapter that feels like an ending, but it isn't. It's an awakening. My story didn't begin with money. And it didn't end with justice. It continued with purpose. And so will yours, if you let it. Before we part, I'd love to hear from you. What part of this story touched you the most? What lesson stood out in your heart? Share it in the comments below. And if this story moved you, if it reminded you of your own strength or someone you care about, please like and share it, because you never know who might need to hear these words today. To our returning family, thank you for walking these journeys with us. And to our new listeners, you are deeply welcome here. If stories that teach, heal, and inspire matter to you, don't forget to subscribe, so you never miss another lesson wrapped in a powerful story. Until next time, remember this: your worth was never lost. It was only waiting for you to claim it.